Hi, thanks for watching. This is Dr. Brian Barnes. I'm a lecturer at the University of Louisville and visiting scholar at the Foundation for Critical Thinking. I've developed a comic book series called Adventures in Critical Thinking that's intended to help undergraduate students, high school students, perhaps others learn critical thinking in the Paulian tradition in an easy to follow format. I've used situations from the undergraduate um, portion of the college experience. The setting is University of Louisville. The comics have all been written by undergraduate students who have taken critical thinking classes and who wanted to participate in this project. The comics have been drawn by other undergraduate students who wish to participate in the project. The digital layout and design was all done by Myth Barnes. And the project is conceived and assembled by me. Rush Cosgrove from the Foundation for Critical Thinking provided really valuable feedback on the scripts before they were drawn. And Patty Payette, Kathy Bays, Edna Ross, and others at the Delphi Center I2A initiative at the University of Louisville provided a lot of support. This project was funded with a Sun grant from the I2A initiative in the Delphi Center. So this video is intended to show you how to use the critical thinking comic book to learn and teach critical thinking. So here we go. First of all, well, there are the credits. It says everything I said. How to use this. There are several things you can do in this comic book. At the very basic level, you can identify vocabulary from the Paulian critical thinking tradition. To that end, I have pages within the comic book, theory pages. Here is one for the elements of thought. Here's another for the intellectual standards, intellectual traits, egocentric thinking, and sociocentric thinking. So students or readers can refer back to these, and there's color coding. That's why they're all different colors. So let's start with our scenario. The guy in the sort of green shirt is Paul Elder. That's the hero in each of these 6 comic books in the original series. And he's meeting up with his buddy Steve, and they're going to talk about what's going on this weekend and what they can do. So they decide that they're going to go to a party. All right, so he's coming back. He's getting ready, and he's going to do his critical thinking homework. Okay, so now we have our first color-coded boxes. I don't think I can finish my homework on time. Paul is being self-reflective. He's looking at his own situation. He's considering his purpose. He's considering the information. And so we could have a blue box around this one, certainly. But Paul's also expressing some intellectual humility, which is going to be the green box. This is the intellectual traits. And so if we go back to these, we see the intellectual traits. When Paul is checking his own thinking, he's expressing some intellectual humility. He's expressing some intellectual courage. He's perhaps engaging in some intellectual autonomy. So again, the extent to which this is happening in every aspect of the comic book is certainly up for discussion, and I hope those discussions are robust because that'll only get us to better thinking about the material. The goal here is when there is thinking going on, can we identify any of it as critical thinking? And so, and even if it's not maybe necessarily the highest level of critical thinking, if we use Richard Paul's definition, one of his many definitions, that critical thinking is thinking about my thinking while I am thinking in order to improve my thinking, then in that case, this might be particularly useful to just identify these. What's he doing? What intellectual habits is he engaging in that would be helpful? And the intellectual traits represent those. So if we go down to the next cell here, we see that this one is in blue. This indicates the elements of thought. So Paul is asking himself questions in this frame and in the next frame. He's looking at his point of view. He's considering assumptions. He's considering his purpose, perhaps, but certainly the most obvious, he's doing some questioning of himself. All of these terms that I mentioned are elements of thought. We move down to this frame, and he decides that he's going to exercise some confidence in reason, right? And so just again, for these two frames, we might go back to this page with the elements of thought. Again, students don't know, readers don't know exactly which of the elements of thought are there, so you would have to read and understand this page about the elements of thought, or perhaps other foundation materials. There are many materials available from the Foundation for Critical Thinking that discuss, explicate, articulate all of this material, certainly publications by Linda Elder, Richard Paul, Gerald Nosich, Rush Cosgrove, many other people, myself, my own dissertation perhaps, or textbook, are, they have a heavy dose of how to use this theory. But certainly I would recommend the materials from the fellows of the foundation at this time, Richard, Linda, and, and Gerald Nosich. So, back to this. So he's trying to figure out, he's going to use some confidence in reason, which is an intellectual trait. Okay, then he starts going through steps. This is a page here in blue. This page is from the Miniature Guide to Critical Thinking Concepts and Tools, which has either a thinker on the front in the new edition, or the old edition is a little blue book that also has a thinker on the front, but hand-drawn in many cases. Anyway, this is a list of a checklist for some reasoning that you might do. And so Paul's asking in this first frame, what's the first step? He's asking a question. He's considering his purpose. He's engaging in an alternate point of view from the one he had before he asked the question. This is all good elements of thought sort of thinking. You'll note that there's a red box here in addition to the blue, a red and a blue border. In this comic series, sometimes there are two colors at the same time. You'll see this also happens here in frame 3. And so when there are two of these at the same time, that's indication that you could maybe just as legitimately apply elements of thought, or in this case, intellectual standards. That's the red one you see here. And so if we go back and say, okay, well, what might be an intellectual standard that's going on here? Well, he's seeking accuracy. He's looking for clarity. He's involved in precision with regard to his own purpose and his questioning. These are some of the initial steps, I think, that we might make with regard to intellectual standards. Here, in the third frame, when he's looking at the question, again, there's the question itself, the process of questioning is one of the elements of thought, so we can connect that. Again, same sorts of issues as when he was questioning up here. Clarity is going to be, I think, probably the most important one here. Okay, moving on to the next page. The next entry in the miniature guide, make a list of the available information. Well, information is an element of thought, and so we have a blue border. And then, because he's going to consider the information, and he does that here. There's also a blue border because he recognizes that information probably takes a lot of paper, to list all that stuff. And we see this down here, him making lists in the next couple of cells. And so let's see. I think also here we have some intellectual standards, because if he's going to make a list of all the available information, he's looking for accuracy, he's looking for precision. That information should be relevant if it's going to be useful. It'll have to be deep enough to help him solve his problem. Hopefully it's fair-minded. I mean, the information itself, he's just making a list of information, but these are all things that he actually does down here. He engages in some precision, not just girls, available girls, not just people, but friends, and other features that we can look at when we're trying to sort this out. And then he goes for an alternate point of view. So we have a blue box, and that's an element of thought. He could go out with Barbara. This is an assumption he's making, right? I mean, he does have a text message from her, for sure, but that could be an implication, maybe of him really deeply engaging with this alternate point of view, a different purpose. And this is all information about that alternate point of view. So he's engaging in one point of view over here for the information, and then he takes this other point of view, looking at different information with regard to the same choice that he's making. And this is a very important beginning critical thinking move. So now we're here on the next page. We have blue in this box. That'd be cool. He's noticing. I mean, it's colloquial, sure. I'm making a certain degree of assumption here about what it is Paul might be thinking, but certainly he is also making an assumption that this would be cool, and if nothing else, that qualifies for elements of thought. All right, what's next? Okay, so now he's engaging in some intellectual humility, some intellectual courage. This is certainly, confidence in the reasoning process maybe. This is certainly justified by the green here in the intellectual traits. The blue here, of course, he's going through his list. So he's going to be, if he's concerned about what's next, he's going through the information. He's looking for other purposes, perhaps, right? So we could engage with the elements of thought again. Maybe he's doing that. Seems likely here. Now here, who or what is influencing the decision? The orange border, which we haven't seen yet in this comic, is for sociocentric bias. So, of course, all of us are influenced by society. If we go back to the chart, we see sociocentric bias, religion, culture, and our nation, group norms, blindly conforming to the restrictions of others, that kind of thing. I mean, all of us fall prey to these kinds of biases, and so he's going to check on that. And in doing that, of course, he's asking a question, which is why we have the blue boundary as well for an element of thought. I guess he's never thought about it, he says. Okay, well, that's something then, if he's not really thought about it. So he's again noticing his own intellectual courage here, his own intellectual autonomy, perhaps, his own intellectual humility, maybe some fair-mindedness occurs from this, who knows. So we have the green as an indicator for that, and then the orange over here on the side again. He's never thought about it, but he has an opinion about it, and this is certainly a hallmark of sociocentric thinking. And so down here he goes through a list of some of his own thinking, and he's going through assumptions, and so we have a blue border, and he's gotten many of these ideas without deep thought, so he picked them up probably from the group in some way throughout his life, and so sociocentric thinking for the orange. Going to the next now, let's see, the page prompts him to note any and all assumptions he has made and to note any and all biases he had. And so assumptions are blue because it's an element of thought, and the biases are orange. And again, which ones does he have? Well, those can be identified, I think, when the student or the reader goes and looks at the page and makes a decision about which ones of these are in play. Again, the student doesn't necessarily know that this blue refers to assumptions. It's great that the word is on the page, but of course that thinking will have to occur on behalf of the reader, which makes this a critical exercise as opposed to a didactic one. And that's an important goal of the project. I guess I've been assuming stuff, so this is all blue because he's got assumptions. I've probably underestimated the likelihood of an alcohol-related incident. Oh wow! So here's some new kind of thinking, right? He's thinking in a different way. So he's engaging in some intellectual empathy, maybe. He's intellectual autonomy, a number of things. He's checking his assumptions, looking at a different point of view. This accounts for green and blue. He's making an assumption about sex with a stranger. He's looking at information and point of view with regard to sex with a stranger. That's a concept that he's carrying around. All of these are elements of thought. Man, my point of view is so narrow. Okay, so now we're seeing, that as opposed to a broad point of view, Paul is recognizing his own failure here. And so we give him a red border because a narrow point of view is opposite from a broad one, and breadth is one of the intellectual standards. And so we could go back to the red page and try to figure that out. His point of view is very narrow, probably because of egocentric bias in the next cell as well. I've been totally focused on immediate gratification. All this goes back to the purple box, egocentric thought. It's true because it's in his own interest to believe it, or because he's always believed it, or something like that, right? And so the student can, or the reader can make that determination on his or her own. And we go on. How would other people be viewing my problem? Well, now he's really engaging in intellectual humility here, and intellectual empathy. He's trying to be fair-minded. He's engaging with his assumptions and with alternative points of view. So this gives us the borders that we have. Professors would want him to study, right? So he has some assumptions there about what his professors want, rightly or wrongly. And certainly he's engaging in some sociocentric bias. We see with the orange border because he probably has that idea without a lot of thought. We just see him make the immediate conclusion without really knowing how he got to it. And then, of course, similar assumptions with others can be put together. His decisions have lots of implications. That's an element of thought that someone could identify. And then he goes through some of the implications there. Then the next set of implications, right? Implications always at least have a set for if this thing comes to pass or if this thing fails to occur. And so we have 2 pages where we're going through 2 sets of these implications, which is I think a useful beginning move again for people just getting started with this. It'd probably be best not to go. Okay, so now he's involving himself, in I think confidence in reason. He's reasoned his way through this, and so this is an intellectual trait, that we can I think highlight here in the green. Meanwhile, his buddy goes out anyway, right? Goes to the party, and so we see a different set of assumptions, right? We can see the look on his face. I think it's worth pointing to just to make the point of the story that this looks like a good time. He's thinking it's a good time. And then we find out Monday morning Paul is engaged in confidence and reason. He is engaged in fair-mindedness and some other, all of the intellectual traits really over the weekend, right? And then the professor's ready for class. I don't know who that's supposed to represent. And then here comes Steve, and here he's a mess. And we see that now Steve is going back and thinking about his own thinking. He's seeing perhaps, that he could have had, if he'd engaged in different habits, for example, if he'd had maybe a little bit more intellectual autonomy, if he'd had if he'd engaged perhaps in a little more intellectual courage as opposed to, these are things that we do when we follow the crowd, right? We fail in these particular traits. Maybe intellectual integrity, although we don't really know the level of Steve's thinking yet. The comic implies it's relatively low. He's down here thinking about his own thinking again. Well, I didn't have much intellectual empathy here, for sure. Maybe not much fair-mindedness for my drunken date's point of view or whatever that might have been. And then he goes on some sort of self-destructive behavior after that, which I think punctuates that he's thought about his own thinking and he's made some evaluation of it along the lines of intellectual traits that show that maybe he could have thought this through maybe in a better way. Of course, could we analyze Steve's thinking through elements of thought? Yeah, we could recreate that, certainly in a creative way, in a classroom setting or just for our own interest to see maybe what Steve might have been thinking that led him to go as opposed to not go. But that's beyond the scope of this particular document. Steve gives some props to maybe the confidence in reason or the intellectual courage or the intellectual integrity or whatever that Paul demonstrated. Did Steve do that intentionally as an homage to an element of thought? Yeah, probably not. Probably Steve's not there, but it would be an implicit move as opposed to an explicit move on Steve's part, which would refer back to the Paulian polarities. Which anyone who's going to be teaching this material really ought to, I think, investigate because it'll help give us a sense of what we're looking for when it's not necessarily a textbook critical thinking case that we want to talk about. And here, and of course, Paul cops to the confidence in reason that he demonstrated, right, by doing the work, right? And I think we have a very similar combination here, which is why we get a green one again, and then we're more or less done. Myth laughed at me when I said this one should be bordered in green. She said, I'm going to take a nap so I don't kill everyone is intellectual traits, huh? And I thought, well, maybe Steve has decided to slow down and sort of reevaluate. Maybe this napping process, I'm making tons of assumptions, right? But maybe the napping process is one that he's arrived at after thinking about some of this. And if so, I think that a case can be made that maybe Steve is demonstrating some intellectual empathy for others, or maybe some kind of maybe even intellectual courage or intellectual humility by deciding that maybe he just needs to take a break. So, all right. So what I've provided here is one. Let me see. Oh yes, we have of course the ads. Please attend the Foundation for Critical Thinking's programs. Information here is at criticalthinking.org. This conference occurs every year, and I hope I see you there this time around. The I2A Institute, again, funded this project, and my great thanks go to them. And so here's their website, and check out their work, and maybe they'll fund you too. Derby City Flavor is a local e-cigarette liquid manufacturer that uses high-quality materials, tries to put safety first, and has local flavors like mint julep and bourbon ball, Kentucky type. This is probably who's going to do our printing when we get around to it. So thanks to Kablam for giving us a great deal, and we hope those folks, are super successful. Okay, so back to, and we're looking for to sell more advertising. So if anybody's interested, please get hold of me through this website. So anyway, here's where we are with this. I've done one analysis. It's only one analysis. It's not perfect. Your analyses might be very good as well. Typically, there can be multiple critical thinking analyses as long as we stay with the evidence and the logic of the system that we're using. In this case, the information from the Foundation for Critical Thinking, the Paulian Critical Thinking tradition, in its very basic forms. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that this is a useful critical thinking artifact for your work. Have a good day.